Hey, welcome everyone to our webinar here at New Gen P. We're very pleased to have Mishkin Berteig with us talk about innovation and product ownership on Canadian Innovation Week of all things. Who knew? So my name is Peter Monkhouse. I'll be acting as the host along with my colleague Joanna Tivik. As we just get started, remind you if you have any questions, we really would like to make this session interactive. Please feel free for those attending to open up your mic or to put a comment in the chat. We'll be watching the chat as we go along. So without any further ado, I don't think I forgot any logistical things. Joanna, over to you to introduce Mishkin.
Thank you, Peter, and welcome everybody. Welcome, Mishkin. We were just talking about when we first met, and that's when I was reflecting on, our first encounter last night, thinking like, when did I first meet Mishkin? So I guess your records are telling us that, we met later in the years as I was hoping for. So I feel that I've known you for many, many years. So Mishkin is our friend, is our partner, is our collaborator. So it's an honor to have you here and talk about innovation. As Peter mentioned, we are in the Canadian Innovation Week. So it's great to partner with you to talk about innovation and also product ownership and bring some ideas to the table. I don't know if you need a lot of introduction because I think most of the people know you, like you have your own company, Berteig. It's in your background, you're doing a lot of training. I was very surprised that you basically reached the 10,000 mark students, that you trained. And I'm thinking like, I can catch up with you. It may take me a while, thinking about that. But there is definitely something to look forward to. And you're doing a lot of courses, especially in the Agile field. And, you specialized in providing certifications for people. And this is a great initiative, just enlarging that Agile community in Toronto and now everywhere in the world, because I assume you have students from everywhere, like we were talking about online learning. So we see that every day that we have people from Europe, from Africa, from South America, from everywhere. So this is great. So you basically trainer, coach, consultant. So doing all these things in the name of Agile, and that's great. And we thank you for that. So I'll pass it on to you right now to take us through. And then again, just let's keep the conversation live. And for the participants, ask questions, intervene, show us your ideas around this topic.
Yeah, and thank you, Joanna and Peter, for having me. As Joanna mentioned, I've known you guys for what seems like a really long time. And that's partly because we've done quite a few different things together. I just want to mention that 2 years ago or so, Joanna and I went for a lunch together, and it was very, very memorable to me because I was talking with Joanna about leadership, and she did some impromptu coaching of me as a leader, which was absolutely fantastic. And so I just really want to mention that Joanna's amazing in her own right. Peter, I don't know about Peter. No, Peter and I have gotten to know each other a little bit more recently, and thank you for all the things that you've been doing in both individually and in partnership with Berteig. I won't say any more about introducing myself, but I do want to introduce my topic a bit. As Joanna mentioned, I've been in this Agile space for quite a while. And even before I encountered Agile, though, I was always interested in technology and business, and was an early employee in some startups, started a couple of my own. They were all pretty much failures. And, I learned a lot from that. and it's always been an interest of mine, this sort of intersection between business and agility. And then also this idea of new ideas. Even in elementary school, I was reading books about how to be creative, how to think effectively. And it's always been this interest of mine. So to me, innovation and product ownership are tied very tightly together in the ideal case, but often in practice, they're not so connected. So as I go through a few concepts and ideas and share some stories, I really want to invite people, especially because it's a smaller group, speak up, ask me questions along the way. I can talk a mile a minute, but I'll try and remember to, put some pauses in. I'm going to share a few things visually, and I'll switch back and forth between that and not sharing. So first thing I'd like to share is just a very simple board that has a couple ideas here. And I wanted to start by talking about product ownership and innovation in terms of agility, which is my expertise. I've spent the last 20 years involved in agile approaches, actually 23 years, but be that as it may, there's a lot more to agility than just, say, Scrum or, a particular framework like Kanban or extreme programming. And, over the years, as I've worked with organizations and people to help them understand and apply agility in practice, I've realized that there's actually these 6 main components. There's the agile methods themselves, and that's where the wording of agile and agility comes from. But both in parallel and well before those agile methods, there was a lot of stuff going on in terms of leadership, in terms of processes with lean thinking, in terms of communities and community development. Obviously technical practices depending on what kind of environment you're in, and organizational change. And there's really such an incredibly rich depth of knowledge in all of these areas. I'm not an expert in all of them, but I think that would be impossible for one human being. But to be aware of this, and then to think about how, if you're a product owner, the scope for thinking about agility and is really huge. It's not just, working with a team to organize a product backlog, which is what a lot of people sort of think of as, and by the way, as a good starting place for product ownership. But there's much, much more to it than that. The first thing I'd like to mention is this concept of leadership. And this is going to connect back to the product owner role in a few moments. But one of the things that I encountered probably about 7 years ago now is something called the leadership circle profile. And this is a leadership framework that focuses on how, focus is actually the wrong word, that actually integrates many other leadership models into a single purportedly, universal model. And, whether it's actually universal or not is kind of beside the point. It is quite comprehensive. And so this diagram that I'm sharing here is an example of a leadership circle profile with a single person having done the leadership circle profile assessment. And there's a couple key things on here. So at the bottom, you see this word reactive, and at the top, you see this word creative. And one of the things that occurred to me is that many people in leadership positions, and that includes product owners, tend to focus on their reactive responsibilities. How do we react to competition or to stakeholders or to user requests? And that's fine. Those are important things. And within that kind of reactive space, we have 3 main kind of capabilities or areas. How do we comply? So for example, how do we comply with governance? How do we protect, maybe how do we protect our users and their information? How do we control our environment to get things done? And those are useful and powerful things. But in order to achieve a more innovative approach to product ownership, we really have to look at the top half of this circle, this creative half, and build capabilities, these 5 capabilities here, of being able to relate to other people effectively, to be self-aware, to have authenticity, to be aware of our systems, and to focus on achievement rather than control. The shift in capabilities from reactive to creative is often something that occurs within people as they mature, although not always. And it does depend a lot on, let's call it, a lot of self-introspection and personal development. So this framework, I'll just say, if you do a Google search for Leadership Circle profile, you can do a free self-assessment, and of course they charge for assessments and coaching and stuff like that. But it's really powerful as a way of thinking about yourself as a product owner. Are you more on the reactive side of things, or are you more on the creative side? And if you're trying to do product ownership in an innovative kind of fashion, you definitely want to focus on that creative side, and build those capabilities. And of course, there's lots of details, right? Like having a strategic focus, or having courageous authenticity, or being a selfless leader. I mean, there's all these specific aspects of this creative leadership. One thing that's very powerful about this model is that they've been researching this for many years now. And there's a very strong positive correlation between leadership effectiveness and scoring highly on the creative side of this leadership circle profile. Now, I'm not going to get into more detail about it right now, unless anyone has any questions about that. I've been trained in it and stuff, so I could answer questions, but I also want to be aware of time and move on if there isn't any specific questions. I talk a mile a minute, as I said, so. Okay.
Sorry, can I just ask, well, under creative, I see there's only 2 highlighted areas for integrity. If you could just explain or help me understand why that is.
Okay, so I'll start by pulling back and just describing maybe in more detail what this circle is showing us. It's really, there's an inner circle and an outer circle here. Okay, and the inner circle is kind of like the big picture categories. So authenticity is a big picture category, and then the sub things on the outside of the circle are kind of the more detailed skills and capabilities that relate to that big picture category. So we've got integrity here at the top. And it's one of 2 related to authenticity. One of the reasons that it's at the top is because, like, this circle is organized as kind of a vertical relationship. So the things that are down at the very, very bottom, so being, for example, being critical, is much more strong capability related to the reactive style of leadership. And as you go to either side of the circle and therefore move up the sides, you're getting to the more and more creative attributes and capabilities. And then at the top of the circle, integrity and courageous authenticity are kind of like the pinnacle of that creative capability. However, all of these things are important and part of being a creative-oriented leader. For what it's worth, this is also modeled on a broader system. Let's see if I can remember all the details. I'm going to draw this in, actually. So there's a sort of system of adult maturity that starts at the bottom with ego. You're seeing this, yeah, okay. And then being reactive, and then creative. But adult maturity goes beyond that. So the next level is integral, and then after that, unitive. And what's interesting is that these top two levels of adult maturity are almost so rare that they're hypothetical, right? Like, these are the gurus. These are the people who have huge impact on the world in a positive fashion. Whereas at the bottom, it's not even considered part of the leadership circle profile because egocentric leaders are the least effective and most destructive. And so this leadership circle profile focuses on these middle ones, creative and reactive, because this is where 90% of leaders sort of exist in terms of their maturity. And it's weighted slightly higher on the reactive side. That's a bit more common than the creative side. But so integrity, because that was about your question, actually takes you further and into an even higher level of leadership maturity. It's just that this particular system doesn't actually delve into the details of that.
So Mishkin, then from a product owner perspective, where do you think, like, what's the level that a product owner should try to achieve in order, like we talk about the highest level, like making an impact.
Yeah.
And then like, where do you see most of the product owners, even from your experience and, like what you've encountered? Like, I have my own perspective, but I would like to hear yours. And where should a product owner be?
Yeah, so that's two questions. So where are most and where should they be? So I have a strong opinion about this because I train so many people in product ownership. I would say 90% of the people in the product owner role are by default, because of their environment, in the complying, protecting, and controlling space. These are people who are perhaps business analysts or salespeople or what have you, who have been told, hey, you need to be a product owner on a Scrum team, which of course isn't the full story for product ownership, right? But they've been told you need to be a product owner on a Scrum team, and their immediate kind of quote unquote responsibility is to just comply with all the different requests from business stakeholders, and to control the team to make them do, whatever work they're supposed to do, and, to protect the interests of the overall business. So the emphasis tends to be in that space, whether people have that capability or not themselves personally, to go beyond that, right? And of course, the challenge is that, product ownership is a leadership role, and product owners will be more effective if they are both able to develop within themselves and manifest these creative capabilities. And that manifesting of creative capabilities is not necessarily something they can take full control of themselves. It often depends on the corporate or business environment that they work within. But I do want to say something about that, which is this idea of courageous authenticity. So, in corporate environments, when there's expectations and you comply to those expectations, basically what you're saying is, I'm not going to push the limits of leadership here. I'm not going to try and be innovative. I'm going to comply. And so that idea of courageous authenticity, which, by the way, is interestingly one of the values in Scrum, courage, is something that I think gets overlooked a lot. And my introduction to agile methods was basically, I read a book, I went to work and said, I'm going to do this. And I didn't ask permission, right? Like I was a 20-something, software developer, and I'm like, yeah, what the hell, this is exciting. I don't need permission to do this stuff. And that's been kind of my personality and attitude. You could also call that, by the way, entitlement, just for what it's worth. I recognize that. But the reality is that there's a positive side to that, which is that I have been able to be a leader in many environments because I simply didn't ask for permission. I just had courage to do something and try it out and see if it worked. And not everything does. I've had lots and lots of failures, including to the point of being fired from a couple different places. But, you know, not everyone can do that. And you know, I did that more when I was young, less now that I have a big family.
Why? So I think Mara has a question. She has her hand up, but I think Mara and I worked together before, and that's what we said. Let's do it and then ask for forgiveness later. So that was our strategy, you know, like as we worked through an organization. So Mara, do you have a question?
Well, it was more of a comment to add to that courageous authenticity. I actually think that the maturity of a person helps with that. So I would actually almost be the opposite. It may be in the sense that when you're newer and younger in your career, you may think you have fewer choices of what if they do fire me? I don't have enough experience under my belt. Versus when you're kind of, you know, I have lots of skills to apply, and if they fire me, I can go anywhere. But there's a real connection between, do leaders need to make it okay to be authentic, or do we all as leaders in the Kanban method, leaders everywhere, show ourselves to be authentically courageous, to be a model for others, and hope that it goes top down and everywhere?
Yeah, I like that comment.
Rather than being victim, you know, kind of like,
yeah.
I might be lucky working not in a toxic environment, but
yeah, leadership isn't just a position. It's an act that anyone can do. And I think that's a really fantastic contribution of, you know, agile methods and tools in general, is whether you call it leadership or self-organizing or self-managing, it's this concept of, hey, you know what, individuals have skills and talents and interests and capabilities, and let's let people leverage them based on what they see is the need at the moment, or strategically, or what have you. And that, you know, management traditionally is about controlling that. Instead, management should become about getting out of the way and letting that leadership emerge. And that's also a kind of leadership too, is getting out of the way. So yeah, I like that point, Mara. Any other kind of questions about that leadership circle profile and its relationship to product ownership? I see there's something in the chat. Okay, thank you. Okay, so let me share my screen again. I want to talk now more specifically about innovation. I've always been interested, as I said, in innovation, creative thinking. I'm a big fan of this author called Edward de Bono, who has written things like 6 Thinking Caps, but also a whole bunch of other books. He even had one called Textbook of Wisdom, which is kind of pretentious, but it's actually really cool. So I've been exploring these concepts around innovation and creativity for a long time. More recently, thanks to a colleague of mine, a guy named Forbes Benning, who's a really fantastic agile coach, he introduced me to this 10 types of innovation system, I think about a year ago or so. And I've been really exploring it and fascinated by it. And I want to just share this as one, like the Leadership Circle profile, it's research-based. It's this guy, Larry Keeley, and some of his colleagues have done research for many, many years about what are the things that are the sort of categories around innovation. How do we think about the categories of innovation? He's come up with this, you know, framework of 10 types, and that's, you know, it evolved. It was different before, but anyway. So there's these three broad categories represented by the colors here: configuration, offering, and sorry, experience. Configuration, offering, and experience. And within them, there's these subcategories. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to give some examples of each of these because they're kind of abstract and it's a little bit hard to think about them with examples. So on the left, we have profit model, the way which a business makes money. And, Gillette innovated there by, selling the razor cheap and the blades expensive, right? The network of connections we have with others to create value. So the very first idea of franchising a restaurant came from Howard Johnson's, and that was in the 40s, right? So this idea of a network of franchisees, the structure in our organization, our alignment of our talent and assets, and the concept that Southwest Airlines just had one type of airplane for a very long time. That's an asset, and then they built their structure as an airline around that asset. Processes. I mean, most of you have probably heard of the Toyota production system in lean manufacturing. That was a global changing innovation, right? Not just in manufacturing. And then what's interesting, this orange section in the middle, this is where most people think about innovation, innovating your product, but it's really just a relatively small part of the overall perspective. And, as product owners, often this is the place where your business might give you a little bit of freedom, right? Like, hey, yeah, if you can think of some cool things for our product or our product system, yeah, why don't you add those to the backlog, right? But the stuff outside of that orange is not often given to the product owner. So I wanted to sort of call this out as being, the focus of many people in the product ownership role. So product performance and the product system. So again, a couple examples there. Corning's Gorilla Glass, which is, just stronger, more scratch resistant. And it's just purely the performance of glass and continuously working to make that better. Or Microsoft Office used to be several separate products: Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint, etc. And they've integrated that, and so now it's a product system. So that's where a lot of business people focus. Not all, but a lot of business people focus on innovating in that area. And it's understandable. That's where a lot of cool tech innovation comes from. Okay, but then we continue into the experience category. We've got, service, the support that surrounds our products and operations. I was researching this. I really like this. I didn't know about this. Men's Warehouse has lifetime free pressing for anything you've bought from them. Cool, right? Like that's a great additional service. The channel, how you access or create new markets. So Nike and their Niketown stores. And of course, Apple and the Apple stores in the technology space. Brand, creating trust in the brand. And so Intel did a great job with this, with the Intel Inside branding that they basically authorized, computer makers and resellers to stick this logo on it, and it made everyone suddenly aware of Intel. Cool. And then finally, customer engagement. Apple creating their worldwide developer conferences. Apple, by the way, does actually innovate in a lot of other areas too. All of these companies do. These are just examples that are probably more well known. One thing that I found as a really interesting example in the book about 10 types of innovation is that Ford in the Model T era actually innovated in 8 different aspects of this innovation framework. And there's examples here. So, payment up front, vertical integration, all the way to rubber plantations being owned by Ford, increasing minimum wage and shortening the workday, creating the moving assembly line, making the cars out of inexpensive parts that could be repaired by anyone, building mod kits that would make it so people could do tractors and I don't know, all sorts of crazy things with their Model Ts, having independent dealers that, you know, promoted their cars through local motor clubs, and even having a motion picture department to promote their brand, right? Like this is like innovation everywhere practically. And so one of the things about this that's a very clear statement by the authors in their research is that the more types of innovation that you can integrate into your product or service, the more likely you are to succeed, basically. It's not a guarantee, for example, but typically most businesses, if they innovate to create differentiators, they innovate in one or two categories. And actually, most businesses are just Me Too businesses. So even one or two categories can be a strong differentiator. But to really grow exceptionally well, to really take a large portion of a market, or even to create new markets, you need to innovate in 3, 4, 5 different categories. And so one of the things that I love about this model is that this is something that you as a product owner can use to test things like your product vision, even the individual items in your product backlog, like what category do they fall in here? And you can start to take a kind of accounting of how much innovation are you given permission to do versus which is outside of the scope of your role. And so to me, like even as a business person, this has been really valuable to understand, but I'm starting to, now that I've become more familiar with this, I'm actually planning to start introducing this in some of my advanced product ownership training. It's, you know, it's not the first thing that a product owner necessarily needs to learn. There's a lot of tactics and stuff like that, but it's definitely a very powerful thinking framework for helping a product owner to really excel at their job and to make their team or teams and their business successful. So again, like with the leadership circle profile, I just want to pause to see if there's any questions or comments or thoughts about this model.
Hi, Mishkin, John here.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see this. I had a good conversation with Peter yesterday, and about moving from Hong Kong and coming back and getting into the Canadian market here in my past experience. And I feel actually, as I go through that whole process, quite fortunate to have, being a business owner, original .com guy from 1999, and starting a business with my brother in Hong Kong, a classified site basically, right, and being a disruptor in that whole field. I see these boxes and I go, wow, I've done and I've been part of a lot of that. And as a product owner and a product manager, you know, a lot of what we did and a lot of what I did and how I structured my day and, just the business in general really did touch on a lot of that. So it's quite interesting to see this. And it's, it's pretty encouraging as with my past experience. You're always trying to figure out, well, what have I done? And how does that play into different markets and different parts of your career? So seeing this is really, it's quite interesting for sure.
Yeah, I'll just reflect on that because I think that, there's these sort of periods of time, you mentioned the .coms, for example, where there's this huge boom in innovation. And we're seeing that in continuing in technology and in other areas, not necessarily just, e-commerce websites, but, things like machine learning, blockchain, which is still a little bit fringe, but, there's all these kinds of areas where, there's kind of levels of innovation. And so like, innovating to create a new platform that disrupts an existing industry is kind of like the highest level of innovation. And things like Agile itself, right? Like Agile methods are a huge innovation that disrupted a whole industry and are continuing to disrupt industries, actually. Software development first, and expanding out to other types of knowledge work over the last 10 years or so. Likewise, open source software like Linux, huge disruptor in terms of like how basically everyone was making money completely had to change. And it took, again, you know, like a decade or two to kind of sort of reach the climax of that disruption. Lean manufacturing, same thing. These are kind of almost platforms for disruption, and they don't come around very often. If you happen to notice one, cool, and you can get on a bandwagon. But one thing that you said is, you know, as an entrepreneur, you already probably have experienced a lot of these, and you have a mindset of being open to seeing this kind of innovation. And you know, one of the things about product ownership that I guess a lot of organizations don't think of product owners in terms of entrepreneurship. You know, and I think that's a really cool way to think about product owners, but it's not common. And actually, I helped someone recently get a job as a product owner, and you know, they were really struggling because they had this entrepreneurial background, but they didn't have an official business analyst product owner background, right? And so really super smart person, fantastic experience, and all the companies, all the interviews she was having, she would get to the final stage, and then she wasn't being selected. And you know, I actually just helped coach her a little bit on how to talk about her experience in terms of product ownership. But that's often a challenge for people who are more entrepreneurial. It's hard to fit yourself into the corporate box. I know that's a struggle for me anyway.
Well, I'm very much in that position right now, which is, you know, I've got that experience, but that's why I'm taking the courses with UAT and attending all these seminars and talking to people just to kind of encapsulate what I've done and how do I move forward with that. So yeah, that's it's definitely I don't want to call it a struggle, but it's a challenge for sure.
Yeah. Cool. Any other thoughts or comments about this 10 types of innovation framework?
Mishkin, I think it's a great framework to think about. And think about Henry Ford and what he did. One of the things I'm wondering is about the relationship between these types of innovation linking to strategy. So one of the drivers that Ford had, as I remember, was to make the car affordable to the average person. Yeah. So I would argue under your consumer engagement, there was some innovation there because he made the car affordable. He figured out how to make it less expensive. That was part of what he's done, and you outlined in some of the areas of innovation, such as a moving production line and more inexpensive parts to make the car more affordable. But of course, the other aspect of that was he paid his people more and got other business owners very upset about that because he forced the wages up so people could afford it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So this got me thinking as you introduced this. So what is strategy and what is innovation, and where do the two sort of meld? Does the strategy of making a car affordable, is that what drives innovation? Or did the innovation actually allow him to drive to achieve or to build the strategy?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I know in my experience, I'm not sure I would necessarily say strategy, but vision. You know, like a business person or a product owner or someone has a vision for how things can be better. And whether it's a more affordable car or something else completely, like, you know, human colonies on Mars, Elon Musk, or, you know, whatever, right? Like these visions are of the potential future I think are indeed what often drive people to innovate. And the scope of the vision often determines the scope of the innovation. Now, that said, the assertion of Larry Keeley is that you can actually go the other direction. So what you can do is you can use this framework to say, hey, here's our current business. Let's look at how, if at all, our current business is innovating. Okay, maybe we're innovating in service and channel a little bit. And okay, so you identify that. And then what you can do is you can say, well, what are the opportunities to do some innovation in our offerings or in our configuration that might help us really take a great leap forward in our business? Because we've already got a little bit of innovation here. If we add, one or two or three more things that are innovative, what are some ideas? And then how you look at your business, you look at the current state, you look at the opportunities, you look at your network, et cetera, and that then can drive the creation of a new strategy and a new vision. So I think most of the time it comes from vision for kind of catalyzing innovation, but it's also possible to go the other direction.
Mishkin, it's Mara.
Yeah.
That made me think of, I sometimes hear people in the leadership of the organization saying things like, well, innovation doesn't have to be a big bang, huge thing, that's like, going to Mars. It can be incremental innovation. And I sometimes wonder, really?
Yeah.
But is that kind of what you're saying? Like you start with what you have now and you're looking to see where you can expand, crack it open more and drive further innovation?
Yeah, one thing that okay, so I'm going to be a little pedantic here. It's not innovative if it's already been done. So this is one of the things that is, let's call it a buzzword, right? Leadership buzzword, innovation. Well, there's another thing that's very similar to innovation, but isn't quite as buzzwordy, although it used to be, which is continuous improvement, right? And so I think what most leaders mean when they say innovation is actually continuous improvement. Let's do some little experiments here. It might not be new for the industry, or we might learn from other people. We're going to try things and improve things, and that's good. It's really important. But it's not innovation. Innovation is new. It's like, so one example is, let's say you're in banking, then one way that you might innovate is you might look to, restaurants, for example, and say, what do restaurants do that banks don't do? How could we, innovate by creating a bank experience that is more like a restaurant experience? And so you're looking for things that haven't been done before among your competitors, basically. And if your competitor is doing it and you're just following along, it's not innovation. It could be improvement, could be great. But yeah.
I think that's a great point, because I think that's what we've seen, especially in the financial services, like the executives going to Australia or Europe, for example, and taking those road shows where they could learn from, and then coming back and saying, we're going to innovate. And they were copying what they've seen in Australia or Europe, instead of saying, okay, so we've seen all these things. What else can we do? How can we push even further what we've seen?
And just to add to that, I know my first experience about talking about innovation was hearing Fredrick Hennen, a Swedish guy, talk about it. This is over 10 years ago. And his definition was using things that already exist, but combining them in a different way. So not, as you were saying, Mishkin. So if we think of some of the disruptors we've seen, if you think of Uber, for example, making software developed to have people sign up and book, that's already was known, well known, right? But not in the taxi industry. So that was the innovation of how to innovate in a different industry to disrupt it.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, there are a lot of ways of thinking about this. You know, I mentioned Edward de Bono and his sort of approach to thinking and creativity and so forth. Mara mentioned lateral thinking. That's another one of his books, actually. But there's another one that's less well known in the West, but is quite well known in the East, which is called TRIZ, T-R-I-Z. And it's actually a Russian acronym that translated into English means the theory of inventive problem solving. I don't speak Russian, so I don't know what the original is. But anyway, and again, kind of like this 10 types of innovation, it's a research-based look at all the different ways that new inventions come about. Like what are the sort of patterns? So TRIZ is kind of like a patterns idea of invention. There's a lot of these out there, and they're all, in my opinion at least, really valuable to become familiar with as a product owner. And I think that kind of leads now to sort of the final point I want to make, which is about the role of product owner. So I've started to think of the product owner as the CEO of a team, right? Like the idea of good product ownership is that you're empowered to be a business person making business decisions to maximize business results. And that agility is a component of that, innovation is a component of that, and that both of those things are really, to be done properly, are the purview of someone who has decision-making authority. And that's, I think, the biggest gap in many organizations around product ownership. This idea of, does a product owner or someone in that role have a decision-making authority, like a CEO of a team? You know, I've been in a bunch of small startups over my life, and sometimes as the CEO, sometimes not. And I'm always kind of, you know, impressed with this concept of these people who seem so smart and confident and so on and so forth, doing these things that they're really making decisions though, right? Like they often don't do so much as they think a lot. They observe, they analyze, and then they also have this creative aspect. They generate ideas, they test things out. And so I think that's kind of my final point, is that for product ownership to really incorporate innovation, whether your organization acknowledges it or not, you have to think of yourself as the CEO of your team. And, you know, there you go. New catchphrase. You saw it here, folks. Product owner, the CEO of your team. I don't have much else to say. I'm happy to take some more questions. We've got a few minutes left. Other comments or thoughts? Actually, I have tons more I could say, but you know, I just don't want to go on another long thing. Mara.
I have I don't disagree with your point, obviously, about decision-making authority as a product owner, but I'm a little worried about the concept of a CEO of the team. I always think of the Scrum team, the Scrum Master developers, as flat, not, you know, somebody at the top. So can you comment on that?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So this in normal business parlance, the CEO has a very specific role, which is that they're not necessarily the boss of people, but the boss of the business. And so the concept is that the CEO is responsible for the outward facing activities of a business, whereas the president is the one responsible for the internal stuff, the processes, the HR stuff, and you know, so forth. And so I'm using the phrase CEO in that sense, not CEO/president, but just CEO, right? someone who's accountable to the board or the shareholders, the sort of stakeholders with skin in the game, to make a go of the business from a business perspective. It's true that we also have kind of this, I guess I'm going to call it a prejudice about the phrase CEO. So I might have to change the phrase, but there's this sort of popular culture view of the CEO as being, this aggressive and assertive authority figure, and that's not how I mean it. So I thank you for bringing that up, because it might not be, not everyone might understand the intent behind that. Yeah.
Maybe, Mishkin, you could spend a few minutes just commenting about, as working with a team, how can you help the team or encourage the team to be innovative? How can you sort of create an atmosphere or culture that fosters innovation?
This is something I think a lot about, partly because I have my own team. So I think with all of these things related to agility, business, etc., the starting point is always permission. So people need to feel, and not just feel, people need to know that they have permission. And so what do they need permission for? Well, if we're talking about innovation, for example, they would need to know they have permission to innovate in either some or all of those 10 types of innovation, right? So as a product owner, you might work with your business stakeholders to say, hey, we'd like to become more innovative. Here's these 10 types of innovation that we can potentially work with. Which ones do we have permission to actually do as a team without asking further permission, right? Like we want a blank check to innovate in some of these ways. Which ones can you give us that blank check for, right? And it might only be one or two ways, but that would be a starting point. You get the permission to start innovating in one or two, maybe three or four if you're lucky, different ways, and then you do so because you have permission. So it doesn't matter what agile method you're working with, but there's always going to be some aspects of reflection and retrospectives, right? So and to me, that's where you would talk about it, right? Whether it's a Kaizen type of event or whether it's a Scrum retrospective or whatever, you would get the permission, and then as a product owner, you would ask the team to say, hey, you know what? We've got permission to innovate in these different ways. What do you think? What are some ideas? What can we do? And you just have to keep asking, because not everyone can innovate on demand, right? So I think part of it is also about patience and making sure people really believe they have the permission, and that if they come up with some idea, that it's going to be supported. Eventually, of course, what you really want in an agile environment is for people to not even ask permission, but just to do it, just to innovate, see what happens, get the feedback loop going with your customers or users or stakeholders, and have fun with it, right? But that usually takes a while.
It's largely a cultural change, I think, as well, right? That you have to have this idea of it's okay to fail, it's okay to try things, and that's going to be rewarded. The journey will be rewarded, not just the result. And many organizations are still so much focused on the results. Any other thoughts from anyone on this, or questions they have around innovation permission at all?
Well, I think part of the permission thing sometimes happens when you're looking to get a design review or an architectural review before you try experimenting on a technology basis, and that sometimes stops us teams from feeling like they have permission.
Right. The gating processes along the way. Yeah.
Yeah, like I can't try a new thing until it goes through, all these hoops of approvals.
Right. And so that's where that, I mean, you may discover that your organization won't let you innovate at all. Like there is no permission to innovate. And that's a bigger battle, obviously, then.
Yes. Again, because a lot of this goes back to culture. Okay. Other questions before we wrap up here? Let you get back to your day. And for those of us in Canada, get ready for a long weekend. So Michigan, any final thoughts or anything you'd like to share?
Oh, yes, there is, by the way.
Yeah, I know there is. So you seem to need a little bit of push to get there. Yeah.
I forgot. Okay, I'm putting this in the chat. A 24-hour deal on signing up for my advanced certified Scrum product owner, 50% off and valid until, so it's actually 24 business hours. But anyway, valid until
24, you say you're here to, oh, sorry, the course is on June 4th. Okay.
Yeah, so the next one is June 4th. If you go to the upcoming classes on Berteig.com, you can find the ones that are available. They're all virtual. They're all run by me. This applies only to the Advanced Certified Scrum Product Owner course. If you haven't taken the Certified Scrum Product Owner course, we can talk about it. So feel free to reach out to me. My email is one way. I'm going to put that in. And I'm also going to give you my LinkedIn profile. You're welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn if you have any further questions. That'll just take me 1 second to get that profile link. There we go. All right. So yeah, I'm happy to connect with any of you on LinkedIn as well. Yeah. Thanks, Peter.
Well, thank you very much, Mishkin. And I really do appreciate you taking time and sharing some of your thoughts. You're always very interesting and very thoughtful, and gives all of us, I think, some pause to think about as we're enjoying the nice weather that we finally have. So thank you. Yes, thank you again for the time. So again, thank you everyone for sharing part of your day today with us and listening to Mishkin and thinking about innovation. So just to wrap up the session, just to remind you of our next in our series will be actually in 3 weeks on June 11th. Note the time is going to be at 3 p.m. Eastern time. We're joined by Dan Roman. Now, Dan is based in Australia, so it's actually going to be the Saturday morning for him, hence a little bit of a later start. And he is one of the people I've met through PMI and has done a lot of talking around agile practices. He runs a almost monthly webinar on projectmanagement.com. So he's come to join us in talking about managing risks in an agile environment and with product development. So a little bit different, and Dan has lots of great stories as he's a practitioner. So I'd be looking forward to having him come and join us. Also, just as a reminder, I mentioned this last session that we had at the end of April, that we are now have our product owners course, Product Owners in Action, available on PMI platform, on the PMI Ascent platform. Can't offer any deals on it, but please, if you want to investigate that, you can go to the web link I have here, or just go to use the QR code to get there. We also, of course, still have our course available on newgenp.com. That's available, and you got a discount for that through attending this webinar. So with that, again, thank you to all of you for attending. If you want to have any further information, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at info@newgenp.com or visit our website at newgenp.com. So Joanna had to step away a few minutes earlier, so on behalf of Joanna and myself, thank you again, Mishkin, for sharing this hour with us and your thoughts. Thank you everyone for attending. Have a great long weekend. Stay safe, and hopefully we'll see you in 3 weeks.